SMT Nation, we back. Nation, this is a pretty big news piece. I definitely wanted to discuss it here with you guys in this video. There is a regulatory agency by the name of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and they've done some questionable things. They've left us scratching our heads a few times recently. But something that I think, maybe some of us aren't aware of or just forget sometimes is there's actually rules and regulations designed to keep things competitive. Right? With wireless and mobile networking, one of those things is what's called a spectrum screen. And spectrum screens are used to prevent any one carrier from having too much spectrum licenses in a network within a specific market. All right, so you got 3 major network operators in a market. No one company should have, majority of spectrum there, compared to the other two. And I'll talk about what that spectrum screen looks like and some examples of it and why right now AT&T is pushing for a spectrum screen. And they're targeting T-Mobile, guys. All right, so we'll be talking about that here in this video. I'll be sure to link this article from Fierce Wireless. Does a pretty good job of explaining it all. And let's dissect it. Link for the article in the description. And of course, ways to support the SMT to show your appreciation for all the content here on the channel. You can find links to that also in the description. All right, so the FCC chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel, has the opportunity to make some changes happen in her time, as the FCC chairwoman. There's a lot of politics to these types of things, but let's just kind of backtrack here. 2020. Right, T-Mobile becomes a much bigger carrier. They basically consume all of Sprint customers. They take all their spectrum. Huge, massive shift in spectrum repositioning. Right, Dish had enough spectrum for a company, T-Mobile had enough spectrum for a company. Sprint had enough spectrum for a company plus some. In fact, the N41 that everybody enjoys, the 5G UC, the 2500 megahertz, a huge abundance of it, 160 megahertz of it, right? And then T-Mobile since then has been acquiring licenses along the way. They've acquired CBRS recently. They've acquired DoD, the 3.45, the 3.7, the C-band, mmWave. They've participated in every single auction because they've been allowed to. Nothing wrong with it. But the question now is being raised and pushed forward by AT&T, and now the FCC appears to be exploring this, a spectrum screen for mid-band 5G spectrum. Remember, there is an existing spectrum screen that dates back many, many years ago for low-band frequencies. These are the frequencies that travel the furthest and work the best indoors with their propagation characteristics. So that's been in place for a long time. That goes back 20 years ago. They also provided a spectrum screen the low band spectrum screen, I think, goes back about 10 years ago. Also, there was a mmWave spectrum screen that was created, I think, a little bit later, a few years later. So you had mmWave covered, low band covered, right? To make sure that no one carrier had the majority spectrum compared to the rest of the market. Right, the competitors in that market. Okay, so no such spectrum screen appears to exist for mid-band. And T-Mobile has been very aggressively gobbling up mid-band. And one company that has been speaking up about it is AT&T. I haven't heard any rumblings out of Verizon. I really have only heard that out of AT&T. Right? So very, very aggressively, T-Mobile has been adding spectrum assets. It's put them in a strength of position compared to the rest of the market. AT&T filed an initial complaint that dates back a few years ago, right? And then I think they raised up another, issue with this just recently, I think as last year. And that was with Spectrum Auction 108, where T-Mobile continued to stockpile, right? Okay, so that's what this is all about. I think what AT&T is trying to do is they're trying to drive down pricing, right? They are trying to drive down pricing for future spectrum auctions. And the reason for that is if there's more companies bidding on spectrum within these auctions, you're more likely to get competitive bidding, which drives up pricing. And at the very least, we could say if there's less companies in the auctions, then it's more likely that AT&T can not only get a better deal, but they can get more spectrum. And when you look at the spectrum holdings, Verizon did a nice job of securing a lot of C-band, and they've secured CBRS. AT&T didn't secure CBRS, right? And they weren't able to get as much as they wanted in the 3700 frequency. They had to max out what they could get in the 3450 with the DoD, and that's the position they're in. So really, that's what this is all about. This is about AT&T trying to secure a future in which they can get more spectrum to kind of close that spectrum gap with their competitors, specifically T-Mobile, right? Namely, and then also pay less for it. It's a power move, and I think they're catering to the right people in a democratic FCC that is hell-bent on net neutrality and other similarly related competitive issues or whatever. It makes sense for them to aggressively do this, right? They're trying to strike while the iron is hot. And I will tell you, after reading the article and looking at some of the, analyst discourse and their commentary, Roger Etner, all these things, these carriers, folks, will say whatever it takes to make things happen, right? Remember when T-Mobile was talking about China and all that before the merger? We got to compete with China, Well, we haven't heard anything about China since. When was the last time you heard T-Mobile mention China? It was like 2019. Well, they closed the merger. They don't have to convince anybody of anything anymore. You see what I'm saying? So these carriers will say and do whatever it takes to get the job done, to get their way. And if it means being anti-competitive, if it means being, just straight up lying and just capping till the cows come home, that's what they'll do. Now, if you're asking for my personal opinion, you may or may not be asking for it, but I'll tell you, do I think a mid-band spectrum screen should be exercised? Well, I think so. With respect to new auctions, yes. T-Mobile has yet to even really truly deploy either of their, N77 frequencies. We haven't seen them scale either 3450 or 3700. So if the FCC wants to exercise a spectrum screen, they should have to force them to build all those pops before they're allowed to bid on any frequencies. So if there's an auction for a new frequency in the next 2 or 3 years, and T-Mobile hasn't built out all their pops for 3450 and 3700, yeah, go ahead and screen them, keep them out, right? And the same rules apply to AT&T. The same rules apply to Verizon. And AT&T, some people have doubts about how fast they're going to build out their DoD, their 3450 and their C-band 3700. The same rules can apply to them. To me, this just feels like it's an AT&T reach. They're trying to flex a little bit, get the attention of the FCC, and I think it makes sense for a spectrum screen in the mid-band. You got it in the low band, and you have it in the millimeter wave. Why the hell wouldn't you have it in the mid-band? So you either have spectrum screens across the board or don't have any. You know what I mean? And to be honest with you, T-Mobile's... I personally don't like micromanaging companies as long as the structure within the marketplace is competitive. It's when things like mergers happen is where things get mucky. Like, why is T-Mobile in this situation? Like, why are they being scrutinized for a screen? It was because they basically took the company that had the most spectrum, especially the mid-band, right? They just straight up took them, and the FCC allowed it. So the FCC created this, right? They permitted it, so they have to screen it. I think that's how this is going to go. What do you guys think? What do you think about a spectrum screen in the mid-band frequencies? A or nay? What do you think about the AT&T position? I think it's some of that sour grapes. I think they're just jockeying for position to pay less for spectrum and to be able to get more of it and keep T-Mobile away from it. But tell me if you agree or disagree. And tell me if you think long-term we're going to see something happen here in T-Mobile. I can tell you guys right now, T-Mobile's going to fight this like hell. They are going to fight this like hell, right? They want to stay in that spectrum advantage. Verizon, again, will just lay low. They don't care. They're just going to put their head down, do what they do, and not worry about all this other nonsense. But AT&T and T-Mobile having a pissy party per usual. What do you guys think? Sound off in the comment section below. You all the voice of the people. The SMT Nation. Let your voice be heard.